Hello friends, followers and channel members, welcome to another video here in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, where today I'm going to be checking out the recently released Native Airbus A330-900 Neo. This is a freeware aircraft available from flightsim.to, and in this video I'm going to do a full flight and I want to check out whether I think this aircraft would be suitable and safe enough to fly properly on the VATSIM network. One of the things that I'm really excited about with this aircraft is that it actually has the fly-by-wire flight deck, which means all of the work that the fly-by-wire team have done and we are familiar with is incorporated to a degree in this aircraft. This means that you have the ability to download a Simbrief flight plan straight into the McDo and of course get things like your METAR and basically fly this freeware long-range Airbus aircraft as realistically as we fly the fly-by-wire A320. Of course, as you will know, that not all freeware mods are suitable and realistic and reliable enough to fly on the VATSIM network. So today, my challenge is to see just how realistic and ready this aircraft would be. To do that, I'm going to take us on a real-world flight from Reunion Island all the way to Paris Orly Airport, a flight time of around 10 hours and 15 minutes. I've created a Simbrief flight plan. Prior to that, I created an aircraft profile for Simbrief, which you can download using the link in the video description. A flight of this magnitude should be long enough for me to make an informed decision as to whether I'm happy to fly this aircraft on VATSIM and perform sort of real-world up flights. I don't expect this to be quite as detailed as the fly-by-wire A320, but from what I've seen so far, this looks like a really great freeware aircraft. And of course, it's an Airbus, which means that if you're familiar now with the Airbus A320, there are very few differences in terms of the overall controls and the flight deck. So you'll be familiar with everything as soon as you step into the cockpit. So let's go and set her up from cold and dark and see if we can get going. So here we are on the ground at Reunion Island's Roland Garros Airport, a French overseas island, and Corsair usually operate a couple of A330 flights between Paris and Reunion Island twice daily. Straight away we notice what a fantastic looking aircraft this is. A great exterior model and all the ground services are working as you'd expect. The cargo is loaded in the back and the catering company arrived from the front right hand doors. All line up really nicely as well, which is great to see and adds to the realism of the aircraft. So let's go and take a seat in the flight deck and we'll look at setting up our cockpit for the flight. As soon as you load in, you'll be greeted with the familiar sight of what essentially looks very much like the A320 cockpit. And of course it is, as it's based on the fly-by-wire cockpit, which means all the flows that we can do are exactly the same. If you're familiar with the A320, go ahead and do exactly as you would just there. In the real world, of course, there are some slight differences in the A330 cockpit. It is a little bit bigger, of course, but certainly for the sake of this aircraft, it looks great. Sadly, at the moment, we don't have the fly pad, so we need to go ahead and just do manually what we would normally do on there. That's not a big turn off for me, and I kind of actually do like the fact that we have a first officer with us in the flight deck, something that you don't normally get with the A320. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on the batteries, get that external power connected, go through the usual setup and see how we get on. In going through the flows, what was really nice to see is things like the engine fire test are all working correctly. You can see they're being illuminated on the ECAM. Sadly, no alarms, but that doesn't really matter too much. But just another little feature that has transferred over from the fly-by-wire aircraft. Once all the flight deck was set up then, it was time to come down to the McDo and see if we could get this set up the same as we do with the A320. First thing I wanted to check was that the Simbrief settings were there, and as it turned out, everything had been saved previously from the A32NX, which I got in, which was kind of nice. I didn't have to put in my Simbrief username, it was already there and stowed. So checking now on the data page, we can see we had the Rolls-Royce engines. They showed nicely, as well as the valid AIRAC cycle. And then I went to the AOC menu, went to the init press, and as expected, we got a nice pull-in of data from Simbrief, complete with the flight time, etc. Here on the fuel page, though, this is where I experienced my first little bug, and it seems that sadly the fuel and the weights and balance page don't quite work and speak to the aircraft as well as they should. All this meant was that if you tried to load the fuel and the payload of the passengers, etc., from your Simbrief profile through the McDo, it didn't actually add the weights and the fuel to the aircraft, meaning that things like your zero fuel weight were going to be incorrect, the amount of fuel on board wasn't as you would expect. So the only way to get around this is to go back to the old-fashioned way of using the weights and balance page from Microsoft Flight Simulator. Now, if you have ever tried to do this, you'll know that it can be a little bit of a pain. Here you can see the operational flight plan, so to try and get the exact payload and the fuel as well can be a little bit tedious. But if we get it as close as we can, we'll see once it's all married up that actually our zero fuel weight, expected takeoff weight, things like that match up quite well using the Simbrief profile available in the video description for you to download. One of the other things I want to bring to your attention as well is by default the empty CG position, as you can see at the top, is set to -5. I'm pretty certain that that's not entirely accurate. I'm not 100% sure what it should be for an A330, but if we pop it around the 30% mark, then you're going to have a much better center of gravity. So go ahead and do that and you should be fine. Once this has all been set up in the weights and balance screen of the simulator, then the init-B page starts to make a lot more sense and you can get realistic values. Sadly, however, at the moment, the fuel value doesn't appear to want to work properly, and even if you try and amend this and put in the real amount of fuel that you have on board, then sadly it won't let you enter it. I think this is obviously a bug and the developers will obviously be looking at rectifying this as soon as possible. Until then though, as long as you know how much fuel you actually have on board using the ECAMs, then you can cross-reference this along with your operational flight plan as you go, so that you'll know you've got enough fuel or you're burning too much fuel, etc., as you fly along. The rest of the FMGS setup then was exactly as we would expect it to be. Here you can see the init A page followed by the flight plan. All the flight plan was brought in seamlessly, and I went through to check using the latest Navigraph data as well. Everything was as I would expect to find it. So then when I went to pop in the SIDS and the stars, that all worked seamlessly as well, and it was just like being at home in the A320. And really nice that I can look at flying the A330 with this same kind of easy setup that we've become used to. Once all the passengers were boarded and the cockpit preparation was completed without any problems aside from the weights and balance, which we've already explained, it was obviously then time to push back, get the engine started and begin actually maneuvering the aircraft. The tug driver did a great job, as you would expect, and it was then time to wait until the engines had stabilized and get the after start flows completed. And as we were doing this, a rainstorm was just starting to come over the island, which looked really rather nice. And one of the things that I had realized how I'd sort of forgotten about is the weather radar. Turning that on and actually seeing the weather patterns moving across, that was really nice to see. At the moment, I'm used to flying the experimental version of the A32NX, which at the time this video has been made, sadly the weather radar is in op on that aircraft. So to see it here in the A330 was a nice little feature. Next then came the actual taxiing of the aircraft, and as you would expect, it does feel big and sluggish if you are used to flying the much smaller A320. It's kind of nice to see that this has been modelled and it's not quite as nippy as you would expect. You need to have some good rudder authority to be able to make the turns where you want them to go. This became a little bit trickier after backtracking and trying to turn my aircraft around on the turning pad. Now, you will need to do this very, very slowly if you are going to do this. So other than that, it handles really rather nicely, but certainly don't try and make the 180-degree turn on the ground at anything over 5 knots. On to the takeoff roll then, and again, other than it obviously being and feeling much heavier and a little more sluggish than the 320, quite understandable, it worked exactly as you would expect, rolling right to the end and passing V1. It took a little bit of time to get there, but I presume that is quite accurate for the 330. And then obviously a nice steady rotation. You don't want to over rotate this as it is much heavier. You want to make sure you get a nice gentle rotation up to a positive rate of climb. One of the only other things that I would point out is I did struggle to keep this aircraft on the centerline, and that was even with very, very little wind. So not quite sure if that is me or just something going on there with the aircraft. But once we were airborne, all was okay. The climb out was, well, really rather boring actually, which is great. It means that we didn't have any problems and we were nicely on our way. There was no problems on the climb to our cruise level, but one of the things that is missing from the performance page of the McDo is the maximum and optimum flight level. All this just means that you need to keep an eye on your rate of climb and make sure that you're not too heavy for the particular flight level that you may have set. Simbrief is quite good at calculating this as well, so always pay attention to see if any step climbs have been programmed into that. I reached our cruising altitude without any problems, and then that was it for the next 10 hours. We could just watch the beautiful scenery of Microsoft Flight Simulator go by until it was ready to begin our descent into Paris. What was really nice to see is the fact that everything in the flight deck, as per the FlyByWire A330-900, works exactly the same. So things like the managed modes, the selected modes, everything works exactly as it should. And if you are thinking then of flying this aircraft on VATSIM, that is a great plus. The arrival into Paris was, again, really nice and straightforward. There were no surprises, no little bugs that cropped up, and if you are flying this aircraft and you have had any bugs, I would love to hear about them in the comments down below, because everything worked out really nicely for me on this approach. One of the things that I did struggle with, however, was actually bleeding off airspeed for the approach. Now, this may have just been me as it was my first flight in the A330, so it could have been something I'm not doing quite right. If you're having a similar issue, then again, please let me know in the comments down below. But it certainly didn't lose airspeed as quickly as I'm used to in the A320. The aircraft captured the ILS with absolutely no problems, so from a systems standpoint, all worked flawlessly. All I had to do now was actually land the aircraft, and the first thing I noticed, or rather the first thing I forgot about, was the fact that you are actually sat much higher up than you are in a A320, so I touched down a little bit sooner than anticipated. That's okay, and then a kind of strange action in that it took me a while to actually get the nose wheel down. Now, I don't know if this is a sim bug or something I was doing wrong. Again, leave a comment down below. It could have been the sort of same issue that the CRJ from Aerosoft had a few months back when that first came out, but I had to actually force the side stick forward to get the aircraft to actually plant the nose wheel on the runway. Once we had touched down though, what a great sense of achievement you get from flying this aircraft, which had zero problems aside from a little weights and balance issue at the start. This was a really great experience. So would I recommend this aircraft? Definitely. Would I fly this aircraft on VATSIM knowing that I need to have full confidence in the aircraft systems? Yes. Yes, I would. Thanks to the backup of the fly-by-wire systems that are on it, I didn't have any issues with this aircraft whatsoever, and I could highly recommend downloading it from flightsim.to. A link is in the video description down below, and it comes with liveries already included, but of course there are now several more liveries also available on flightsim.to. huge congratulations must go to the developers of this freeware mod, and I think it's an aircraft which I would also be quite happy to fly on a live stream as well for you guys at some point in the future. So do let me know if you would like to see that as well down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. If you have found this video review useful, then please do leave a like on the video, and also please do hit the subscribe button, and remember to turn on the notifications bell as well if you are new to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all again very soon. Bye bye for now.